APUSH students, POF here with the Unit 2 Part 2 review. Today we'll be looking at Native Americans all the way up to a couple suggestions for movies. Again, unit is 1607 to 1754, Jamestown Colony, and the beginning of the French-Indian War. So, Native Americans. First off, how do they interact with the British? They are going to save Jamestown. If you remember, John Rolfe, your tobacco boy, is going to marry Pocahontas over here. And that is kind of a political power move on their part to make peace between the natives and these new British settlers. But the Powhatan are going to show them how to grow corn, which is going to save their lives. These British guys are bringing wheat over and trying to grow like they did in Britain. It's not going to work, and the natives are going to save them. Not only are they saving Jamestown, they're also saving the Pilgrims up here, okay? Again, remember Squanto gives that corn tutorial to the Pilgrims, and they thank him by having a feast, and that's called Thanksgiving. You should look up myths on Thanksgiving, it's pretty interesting stuff. But again, the British are going to be saved by these natives in more than just these two instances. And how are they repaid? The British are not going to marry the natives pretty much at all, despite Mr. Rolfe and Pocahontas here. They essentially don't want to mix with them. They think that they're culturally superior, and they bring women with them, right? So they don't have to marry Native Americans. They can go ahead and bring their wives with them. Now, there's also going to be a series of wars between the British and the Native Americans. We've covered a few, so know some of those. Now, the Spanish also have their own troubles. Unit 1, we talked about the Pueblo Revolt, so make sure you know about that. And we have the French with the Beaver Wars. This is the Iroquois and their allies against the Algonquins and their allies, and they're fighting over trade rights with France. So natives also have some intertribal warfare as well. Now, women in this time period, like I said, the English are going to bring women with them, okay? So they arrive on ships with whole families on board, and that's going to have different relations with Native Americans, like I said, and they're going to kind of remain more British as opposed to the Spanish or Dutch that intermarry and are culturally kind of mixed with the natives in that area. So they remain very, very English, okay? We also have the Salem Witch Trials, 1692. You guys read The Crucible in your English class, so you know about that event. But there is some hysterics that happen in the Massachusetts colony, and a bunch of women are going to be blamed for practicing witchcraft. And it will lead, over 200 people are accused of witchcraft, men and women, but 19 people will be executed. And this really exemplifies the religious fervor that's happening in the British colonies. So it's an important event to know. Now, African Americans. You guys remember the transatlantic trade, or that triangle trade. So how are all these Africans getting from the continent of Africa to North and South America? They're being shipped in what we call the Middle Passage, right? You remember the brutality of the doctor explaining how all these slaves are jammed into the steerage of the ships, which is the lowest part, and they have no place to go to the bathroom. They're all sick, very, very rough. Millions are going to die in that Middle Passage, so it's important to note. So the slaves come from Africa. They end up in these West Indies, where they're sold to the colonists up here in the 13 colonies. And in exchange, they're going to sell flour, they're going to sell the corn they're growing, that kind of stuff down here into the Caribbean. And then goods, unfinished goods, go to England, and then England trades those finished goods like guns and liquor and stuff like that to the African tribes for more slaves. and then the triangle continues. We also have the slave codes. Now these are a series of laws that are passed in the colonies that restrict the rights of African Americans. So even in this colonial period, we see that slavery is getting codified in America, or pre-America rather, in the colonies. And they're going to say that slaves aren't allowed to read. They're going to say that slaves aren't allowed to gather in groups bigger than 8. There's a bunch of these laws that restrict the rights of African Americans. This is also going to lead to an idea in the British colonies of racial superiority. Now, all the Europeans are very racist, but they are intermarrying, and like I said, their cultures are merging with Native Americans. But in the British colonies, there's this idea of white and black being totally separate, and that, of course, is going to carry on into America. There is resistance to slavery, okay? Some resistance is non-violent. It's slaves will work less hard. They'll break tools on the farms, things like that. But some are very violent, right? We have the Stono Rebellion, 1739. All the slaves are going to rise up and kill a bunch of their masters, kill a bunch of white folks. And the white people, you might remember this from class, they are going to move in and they're going to kill a whole bunch of African Americans, and they'll put their heads on spikes and put them as mile markers on the roads to as a sign to the rest of the slave population that you should not rebel against your British masters. So know about that Stono Rebellion. Now, immigrants and foreigners at this time, everybody in America except for Native Americans are immigrants and foreigners, so that is not really applicable here yet. But technology, culture, and reform, each of these areas has a separate culture. New England region, they have that great Puritan migration, 1620, and that is the Pilgrims and the Mayflower coming over, and they are very strict religiously, okay? It's almost urban in this area up here. They do have some cities like Boston and things like that, but it's almost urban, not quite totally. Then we have the middle region, which is over here, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. This area is very diverse, okay? If you look at this map over here, you can see that Pennsylvania especially is very diverse as far as these cultures and nationalities go, okay? And the reason is because Pennsylvania is a very liberal place, unlike New England, where they're very strict and they only want Puritans and Protestants. Pennsylvania is willing to accept other people. It's also almost urban. We have Philadelphia, which will be the capital of America once the Revolution happens, but it is pretty urban up there. Now, Chesapeake region. Religion is not all that important. Chesapeake, by the way, is Maryland and Virginia, usually, sometimes Delaware too, but it's this area right here, okay? Religion is not all that important for these guys. They are more concerned with farming and things like that. Not a lot of women in the Chesapeake colonies. They're growing tobacco, and they don't really care about church all that much, okay? They're more concerned with production. Very English. Anglican, if you remember, means the Church of England, so you can see, especially in these southern and Chesapeake colonies, it is very English culturally and religiously. Now in the South, obviously, their culture is all based around slavery. They are growing rice, which is very labor intensive, so they are going to use slavery quite a bit. We also have Georgia. If you remember, Orthorpe is going to try to start a prison colony in Georgia, which turns out to be a huge failure, so know about that as well. Now we also have the Great Awakening, very important for this time period. This is 1730s through the 40s, and it is expansion of religion, okay? A whole bunch of different new religions are going to pop up, like the Baptist religion and things like that. and Americans are going to start becoming very religious at this time period. Historians like to call it the democratization of God. And what that means is that people are now practicing religion outside. They don't need a church like the old Puritan way. They can just go outside and have a sermon, no money, no donations, things like that. So, very important, okay? A very famous document from that time is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which is a sermon by Edwards. It's kind of a fun read if you're into that, but kind of an important document to know. Now again, no federal government yet, so don't worry about that for this section. So let's get into summary, starting with turning points. First off, 1607, founding of Jamestown, very important. 1670, we have Bacon's Rebellion, which marks the beginning of the British people realizing that they need to bring slaves and that indentured servitude is not going to work. We have King Philip's War. That's important because it shows Native Americans did resist, and it also shows that the British put them down harshly. And we have the 1730 Great Awakening. Again, know that it's the democratization of religion. Now, subperiods, there is none here, okay? This is just the colonial period, so we don't really need to have subperiods for Unit 2. But we do see some good change in continuity. First off, and probably most important, is we have colonial identity starting to come around at this time. So the colonies are starting to feel like they are separate from Britain. They're still British, but they feel like they're kind of like a new form of British. And the reason is because they have this kind of religious freedom that Britain doesn't have. Remember, all of British people are supposed to be belonging to the Church of England, so they have that religious freedom. They have democracy with like the town hall meetings and the Mayflower Compact. They have self-rule. They have these Enlightenment ideas. So they feel like they're kind of a new and improved version of Britain. And obviously that's going to lead to revolutionary ideas. We also have Native Americans in New England being put down, and we have the development of slavery legally and culturally. But what is being continuous throughout this period? The colonists are still British. Like I said, they may feel like they're the superior British, but they still consider themselves as British citizens. And you'll see that in the French-Indian War. They'll even fight for Britain when they're called upon to do so. We also have the French and Spanish still kicking around in most of North America, so they're still there. Now, characterize, how would you name this period? How would you characterize it within U.S. history? Again, it's the colonial period, so how would you kind of fit that into the greater scope of U.S. history? Now, some cool stuff for Unit 2. Salem Witch Trials, there's 2 pretty solid movies. The Crucible, you guys probably watched that in your English class, and you have this woman who's the worst, but check that out. It's kind of a good little review for that. There's The Witch, which is very rated R, so ask your parents before seeing that bad boy, but it is kind of about Puritans, not so historical, but it's a fun watch. Jamestown, there's 2 movies here. The New World, which is, I haven't seen that, but I read it's pretty good, and Pocahontas. You can see just by looking side by side of the real Pocahontas and the cartoon version how accurate that movie is going to be historically. But there you go. Alright, that's it for Unit 2. Make sure you guys are doing the SAQ practice tests on Google Classroom. Thank you guys. Stay safe. Don't do drugs.